Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis, 16b of Maseches Megillah. We are starting 2 lines from the bottom of the page, and the Gemara has been going through some comparisons between Talmud Torah, how great the learning of Torah is, even greater than, we said, even greater than saving lives. Again, there's a certain aspect of it that makes it greater, even greater than building the Beis HaMikdash in some circumstances. And now, says the Gemara in the middle of the line, 2 lines from the bottom, Amar Rabba, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Mirta. Rabba says that Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Mirta said, Gadol Talmud Torah yoser mikibud avaim. Learning Torah is greater than honoring parents. Again, it could mean for certain aspects. How do we see this? Shekol osan shanim shahaya Yaakov Avinu beveis Ever lo nanash. Because all of the years that Yaakov Avinu was in the Beis Medrash, in the yeshiva of Ever, he was not punished. So the Gemara is going to go through the whole calculation, but what it's going to ultimately get to is that Yaakov Avinu left his father's house for 22 years, and he was therefore punished in a certain sense because he wasn't observing the mitzvah of honoring his father, honoring his parents, his parents, that Yaakov was punished, that he had his son taken away from him for 22 years, because Yosef was missing from Yaakov. When Yosef was sold down to Egypt, he was missing from Yaakov for 22 years. And that was like a midah k'neged midah, measure for measure, a punishment for Yaakov not being involved in honoring his parents for 22 years. But, as the Gemara will show us, he was actually away for 36 years, because there were 14 years where he was learning in the yeshiva of Shem ve'Ever. And so, he should have been punished for 36 years. Says the Gemara, no, because the years that he was learning in the yeshiva of Shem ve'Ever, he wasn't punished for, because Gadol Talmud Torah, because Talmud Torah is even greater than Kibbutz Rabbanim. He wouldn't be punished for the years that he spent learning Torah. How do we know? How do we get all these numbers? So the Gemara now will go through a calculation. De Amar Mar, because it was said, the master said, Lama, top of the next page, top of Yud Zayin Amar Aleph, 17a, Lama nimnu shnosav shel Yishmael. Why does the Torah tell us how long Yishmael lived? As Rashi says, why do we need to know the years of a rasha, of someone who was wicked? Why do we need to know the lifespan of Yishmael? Says the Gemara, Kedei liyachis bohen shnosav shel Yaakov. It's only to be able to figure out the years of Yaakov and calculations regarding Yaakov's life. How so? Tichsiv, because the pasuk says, Ve'eleb shnei chaye Yishmael me'as shana u'shloshim shana v'sheva shanim. These were the years of Yishmael, of the life of Yishmael, 137 years. Yishmael lived to be 137 years old. Kama kashish Yishmael mi Yitzchak. Now, how much older was Yishmael, the son of Abraham? How much older was he than Yitzchak, his younger brother, his younger half-brother, the other son of Avram? So, the answer is Arbei Sarshnim. Yishmael was 14 years older than Yitzchak. How do we know? Tichsiv ve'Avram ben shmonim shana v'sheish shanim b'ledes hagaras Yishmael. The pasuk says that Avram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him his son Yishmael. Uksiv, and it says ve'Avraham ben ma'ashana, and Avraham was 100 years old b'hivalad lo as Yitzchak b'no, when Yitzchak was born. So if he was 86 when Yishmael was born, he was 100 when Yitzchak was born. So that means that Yishmael is 14 years older than Yitzchak. Uksiv, and the pasuk says V'Yitzchak ben shishim shana b'ledes osam, that Yitzchak was 60 years old when Rivka gave birth to Yaakov and Esav, Yitzchak's 2 sons. So if Yitzchak was 60 when Yaakov was born, Yaakov and Esav, and Yishmael was 14 years older than Yitzchak, so that means that Yishmael would have been 74 years old when Yaakov was born. Bar Kama Hava Yishmael, how old was Yishmael? Kedis Yalad Yaakov, when Yaakov was born? Bar Shivim Barba, he would have been 74 years old. Now, he was 74 at the time that Yaakov was born, and we know that he died when he was 137. So Kama Faishang Shanye, how many more years are left of his life? Shisin utlas, 63. Right? If he was 74 now and he lived to 137, he's going to live 63 years until he dies. That means that Yaakov was 63 years old when Yishmael died. V'tanya, we learned in a brisa, Yaakov v'inu b'shash nisparach me'aviv ben shishim b'shalosh shana. Yaakov was 63 years old when he received the blessing from Yitzchak. Right? The famous episode where Yitzchak intends to bless Esav and instead Yaakov takes the blessings. How old was Yaakov? He was 63. How do we know he was 63? It doesn't tell us he was 63. So the answer is because of the following, Voba Perek Meis Yishmael, because that's when Yishmael died. We know that Yishmael died right around the same time that Yaakov received his blessing, and we just calculated that Yishmael died when Yaakov was 63. So that's how we know that Yaakov was 63 when he received his blessing, because we know he was 63 when Yishmael died, and we know he received his blessing around the same time that Yishmael died. Dichsiv, how do we know that Yishmael died at this juncture, at this time? Dichsiv, because it says, Vayar Esav ki beirach, and Esav saw that Yitzchak had blessed Yaakov, and sent him off to find a wife. So Esav realized he should also go find a wife. Vayelech Esav el Yishmael, so Esav went to Yishmael. Vayikach es Machlas bas Yishmael, and he took Machlas, the daughter of Yishmael, Achos Nevayos, the sister of Nevayos, as a wife. So, right after this episode with the blessings, Esav goes to Yishmael and marries Machlas, the daughter of Yishmael, who is also, by the way, the sister of Nevayos. Ask the Gemara, Mimashma shenemar bas Yishmael, from the fact that the Torah tells us that Machlas was the daughter of Yishmael, Eini yodea she Achos Nevayos, don't I know that she's the sister of Nevayos? I know that Nevayos was one of the sons of Yishmael. So, if she's a daughter of Yishmael, and Nevayos is a son of Yishmael, then I know that she is at least a half-sibling of Nevayos. So why does the Torah have to tell me that he married Machlas, who was the daughter of Yishmael, and the sister of Nevayos? It seems unnecessary, extra. Says the Gemara, Melamed, what it's coming to teach me is Shekidsha Yishmael Umes Visia Nevayos Achia. What it's teaching you is that somehow Nevayos was involved in her marriage. Right? It says that Esav took Machlas, the daughter of Yishmael, the sister of Nevayos. It tells me that was important to this marriage that she was the sister of Nevayos. How so? Because Yishmael was Mekadesh, or Yishmael accepted Kiddushin, right? Accepted Esav's hand as a husband to his daughter Machlas, accepted him as a son-in-law, but he died before they could complete the marriage, and Nevayos, her brother, was the one who ended up marrying her off. That's why it says that she's the brother of Nevayos, because he was the one to complete this marriage of Machlas to Esav. And what that tells me, though, is that Yishmael died right around now when Esav went to marry Machlas. So now I know that Yishmael died at this juncture, right around the time that the blessings were given. I know that Yishmael died at the age of 137. I know that Yishmael was 74 at the time that Yaakov was born. So it must be that now, it's 63 years later, it must be that Yaakov is 63 years old at the time he receives his blessing. Okay, so now I have Shisinutlas, I have 63. Now let's add Ve'ar Beisar Adam Yalid Yosef. There's going to be 14 years mentioned in the Torah before Yosef is born. Because Yaakov goes now to Aram Naraim, and there he works for 7 years to marry Rachel, ends up being Leah, and then he also marries Rachel, and he works another 7 years, and it's after 7 years that Yosef is born, and so Yosef is born after another 14 years. How do we know that it was then? Because Because Rashi brings the psukim, it says, Avaticha arba esrei shana b'shtei benosecha. I worked for four, after, Rashi doesn't quote us the whole psukim, but it's clear from the psukim that Yosef was born at the end of the 14 years that Yaakov had said he would work. Fine, so that's another 14 years. Hashivin v'shiva. So add the 14 to 63. We know he was 63 when he ran away. He got the blessings and ran away. We know that 14 years passed until Yosef was born. At least 14 years, but that's what we know from the psukim. 14 years passed. So now he's 63 and 14, he's 77. Uksiv, and it says, V'Yosef ben shloshim shana ba'amdo lifnei Paro. Now we know that Yosef, the pasuk says, was 30 years old when he came before Paro. After being sold and being a slave and being in prison, he was 30 years old when he came before Paro. Ha-meya v'sheva, that's another meya v'sheva. That brings us to that Yaakov at that time is 107. Because again, Yaakov was 77 when Yosef was born. 30 years later, Yosef stood before Paro, which means that now Yaakov is 107. Now after Yosef stands before Paro, there are 7 years of plenty, and so let's add that on, and 2 years of famine before Yaakov comes down to Egypt. So let's add to that number, we have the Sheva, Hamei Sheva, he's 107, Shav Desava, we have the 7 years of plenty, Vitarti Dekafna, the 2 years of famine, so now we're up to 116. Because, right, Yaakov was 107 when Yosef came before Paro. Add another 7 years of plenty. That brings us to 114. Yaakov's now 114. 2 years of famine. Yaakov's now 116. And that's when Yaakov comes down to Mitzrayim. Yaakov comes down to Egypt and he appears before Paro. Vayomer uksiv vayomer Paro Yaakov. And Paro says to Yaakov, Kama yemei shnei chayecha. The pasuk says that Paro asked Yaakov, how old are you? Vayomer Yaakov, and Yaakov said, El Paro, to Paro, Yemei shnei megurai shloshim u'ma'as shana. I'm 130 years old. So either he lost count, or we're missing some years, because we just made a whole calculation that he was actually 116. Says the Gemara, Me'ev v'shitzer, he's only 116 at this point. 63 years until he gets the blessings. 14 years from when he runs away until Yosef's born. 30 years until Yosef comes before Paro. 7 years of plenty. 2 years of famine. He's only 116. Ela Shema Mina, so rather, we learn from here, there's 14 years that went unmentioned somewhere. Shema Mina, and there's only one place where they could be. They have to be between when he ran away and until he got to Aram Naraim. Because we know 14 years passed from when he got to Lavan's house until Yosef was born. But we don't know how long it took him to get to Lavan's house. That it doesn't say. So the 14 years that we're missing have to be right in that slot between when he runs away and he gets to Lavan's house. So there must be 14. So where was he those 14 years? There was 14 years between when he ran away until he got to the house of Lavan, where he was learning in the yeshiva of Aver, and those are not mentioned in the Torah. Titania, as we're learning a Brisa, Haya Yaakov Avinu beveis Aver mutmar arba esrei shana. Yaakov Avinu was hiding in the Beis Medrash, in the yeshiva of Aver for 14 years. Aver meis la'achar sheyared Yaakov Avinu Aram Naraim shtei shanim. And Aver, by the way, died 2 years after Yaakov left to Aram Naraim. Yatsa misham uvalo Aram Naraim. He left the yeshiva. He came to Aram Naraim. Nimtza. So then it turns out, if he spent 14 years there, kisha amad al ba'er ben shivim b'sheva shana. When he got to the well, where he meets Rachel for the first time, he was 77 at that point already. So he was 63 when he left. He spent 14 years in the yeshiva of Aver, and he was 77 when he got to the well. Add another 14 years until Yosef's born, he's now 91. Add 30 years of Yosef, he's now 121. Add the 7 years of plenty and 2 years of famine, another 9 years, he's now 130. How do I know he wasn't punished for those years that he spent away from his father, the years that he was in the yeshiva of Aver when he was learning Torah? Titania, because we're learning a brisa, Nimtza Yosef Shapir Shmei Avav Esther Mushtayim Sham. The brisa says Yosef, who left his father. Yosef was separated from his father for 22 years. Kishem Shapir Ish Yaakov Avinu Me'aviv, just like Yaakov separated from his father Yitzchak for 22 years. Now ask the Gemara, what do you mean that he separated for 22 years? It was 36 years. Tlasin V'shisa Havyan. It was 36 years from when he left his house until he came back. Ella, our Beisar Dahava, Beis Ever Lo Chashiv Lahu. Must be that the 14 years that he was in the house of Aver don't count. And so that's why it was only 22 years. Now, where do we get 22 from? We didn't really talk about that. Where did the 22 come from? So that's a calculation. We know he worked for 14 years to marry Laban's daughters. Now, if you look in the Psukim, there's another 6 years where he works for himself. Well, that's where the whole episode with the sheep and he's amassing his own fortune, his own wealth. And so then it brings you up to 20. Now ask the Gemara, Sof to Beis Lovang Esther and Shnin Havyan, but still, that's only 20 years. That's only 20 years. So, where do we get the last 2 years? Ella Mishum Dishtoi Be'orcha Tartin Shnin. Because it took him 2 years to get back. He took his time coming home back to Yitzchak's house after he left the house of Laban. Titanias, we're learning a brisa. Yatzame Aram Narayim Uva Lo Lesukos Ve'asa Sham Shmona Asar Chodesh. That when he left Aram Narayim, we have the episode where he meets up with Esav, but then it says he went to Sukkos and he built. Shenemar, it says V'Yaakov Nasa Sukkosa. Yaakov traveled to Sukkos. Va'ibn Lo Bayis, he built a house. L'Ipnei Asa Sukkos, and he made Sukkos for his cattle. So he stopped in Sukkos on the way. How long did he stop for? The Torah doesn't say. But the Gemara is telling us it was 18 months. Where do we get that number from? Because it says he built a house, and he built Sukkos. He built huts for his cattle. So, the Gemara, Rashi explains, he built a house for the winter, that's 6 months, and he built Sukkos times 2 for 2 seasons. He spent a summer where he had Sukkos for his cattle, a bayis for the winters, another 6 months, that's 12 months, and then another summer, the second Sukkos is another 6 months, that's 18 months. Okay, so 18 months. And now he also then spent time in Beisel, still on his way back. And I don't know how we know it's 6 months, but the Gemara is saying that was for 6 months. Another 6 months, that gets us up to 24 months. That's 2 years. So that's another 2 years on his way home before he got back. So that means he was away from home, other than the 14 years that he spent in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'aver, another 22 years, and because of that, he was punished that he had his son taken away from him for 22 years, but the 14 years that he was in the yeshiva, he was not punished for, because Gadol Talmud Torah, Yoser Mikibud Avaim, that Talmud Torah, learning Torah, is greater than Kibud Avaim. Okay, Hajar Alach Megillah Nikris, we return to you, Perek Megillah Nikris. Mazel Tov, I'm finishing the first parak of Nesachas Megillah, and here we go with the second parak. Says the Mishnah, Hakares HaMegillah L'Mafreya. If one reads the Megillah out of order, Lo Yatza, you're not Yatza. You have to read the Megillah in order. It's important to understand the series of events, how they unfold. That's part of understanding the miracle. You have to read the Megillah in order. Kara Alpeh, if you read it by heart, Kara Targum, where you read an Aramaic translation, B'chol Lashon, or any language, Lo Yatza, you're not Yotze, you don't fulfill your obligation. You can't read it by heart, and you can't read it in another language. But you could read it in another language to people who speak that other language. So, it's a bit of a contradiction. First it says you can't if you read in a different language, you don't fulfill your obligation. Like it says, but if you speak another language, you could read in another language. So the Gemara is going to try to understand this apparent contradiction. Somebody who speaks a different language, but hears it in Ashuris, hears it in Hebrew, from the Ksav Ashuris, from the Hebrew writing. So then, Lashon HaKodesh, Ashuris here means Lashon HaKodesh, so then you are Yotze, you fulfill the obligation. Kara Sirugin, if you read it with spaces, like skipping, not that you skip words, but you wait, you delay. You read a little bit, and then you take a break, and then you read a little more. You're still, or umisnanim, or you're drifting off as you read it, but you still read it and you hear it. So, yatsa, you fulfill your obligation. Hayakosa, or if you're writing the Megillah, and as you're writing it, you're reading it. It's Purim, and you're reading as you write. You're a fast writer. You can finish the Megillah in one day. Or darsha, or you're like teaching, you're elaborating on the Megillah. You're reading out to the people and you're teaching about it. Umagia, or you're editing a Megillah. So, but you're reading it as you edit it. Im kivin libo yatsa, if you have kavana, if you have intent to fulfill the mitzvah, then you're yotze the mitzvah, you fulfill the mitzvah. The imla, but if not, lo yatsa, then you're not yotze. So, you have to, if you're reading it for some other reason, you're only yotze if you have kavana that you're also reading it for the mitzvah. Haisek suva besam, uvesikra, uvekumos, uvekankantom. If it was written in any of these types of inks, which the Gemara later is going to tell us what they are, but they're different kinds of inks other than dio, which is what you're supposed to use. So you are not yotze. Al haniyar v'al diftera, if you write it on what it's referring to as niyar, some kind of paper, or diftera, another kind of paper of some sort. Again, the Gemara later is going to tell us what these things are. So then, lo yatsa, you're not yotze. Ache ksuva ashuris ala sefer uvidio. It has to be written in ashuris, so the Hebrew text that we have, and it has to be written ala sefer on a scroll, a parchment, uvidio, and using dio, the black ink that we use. Okay. Ask the Gemara, from where do I know that you can't read the Megillah out of order? Now, logically it makes sense, but is there a source for this? So, Amar Rava. So, Rava says, the Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, Kichsavam v'chizmanam, that you should fulfill Purim, Kichsavam, as it's written, v'chizmanam, and like the designated times. So, meaning in the times that we learned about are the options, that the 14th, if you're outside of a walled city, and on the 15th in a walled city. Now, just like the times are in a specific order, when it says you should fulfill the mitzvahs like their times, obviously time goes in order. So we learn from there, so too the writing can't be out of order. The way it's written, the way it's read, cannot be out of order. So that you should do it like it's written and like it is like it's written and like the times that are designated. So just like the times are in a specific order, its writing also has to be in a specific order. When you read the writing, it has to be in a specific order. The order. So ask the Gemara, midi kriya ksiva hacha? But is this pasuk talking about reading the Megillah? Asiya ksiva. This is talking about doing the mitzvahs of the day. Dichsev, as the pasuk says, lios osim eshnei yamim ha'ela. That you should make these days, you should fulfill these days as days of Purim, as they're written and in their right times. So it's not talking about reading the Megillah, it's talking about fulfilling the mitzvahs of Purim as they are written. So that's not going to inform me about how you have to read it. So rather it comes from the following. Dichsev, it says in the Megillah, Vayamim ha'ela nizkarim v'nasim. These days should be mentioned, which is talking about reading, and you should talk about it, you should read about it. V'nasim, and they should be done, they should be fulfilled. So iskish zechir lasiya, so we can compare the way that you remember it, the way that you read it, to the way that you do it. Just like when you do the mitzvahs, you can't do it out of order. After the chira lemafreya lo. So too, remembering it, mentioning it cannot be out of order. Now, what does this mean that the asiyah has to be in order? So it's possible that it means, like we've already, again, there's no order to the mitzvos of Purim, but we already established that there's a comparison between the doing and the days. That the days can't be they can't be out of order. They're days. They're always going to go in order, and just like those have to be in order, so too we said that kichsavam you should do it as it's written, meaning that too should be in order. Now I don't know how you would do that out of order, but we know that the doing should be in order, so to speak. So once we apply that to the words kichsavam, to do as it's written, so now we can take another step and say, well, you're supposed to remember as you do. And if you're supposed to do in a specific order, so you're supposed to remember, you're supposed to read it in a specific order, in the order that the Megillah comes. And that's the way that you're Yotze. Okay, Tana, now it's talking about Brisa, v'chein b'halal. So too Hallel has to be read in order. V'chein b'Kriyas Shema, and Kriyas Shema, the Shema also has to be read in order. U'v'tefillah, and Tefillah has to be in order. And now the Gemara will explain each one. Today we're going to talk about Hallel. Hallel minal, and how do I know Hallel has to be read in order? Rabba Amar, Rabba says, Dichsiv, because the pasuk says, Mimizrach Shemesh ad Mivo'o. In Hallel we read a pasuk that says, from the rising of the sun until the setting. So that's in a specific order, and we learn, it says, Mimizrach Shemesh ad Mivo'o, Muhu Hashem Hashem. From the rising of the sun until the setting, Muhu Hashem Hashem, we should praise the name of God. So just like the sun has an order that it rises and sets, so too our praising of God should be in the order of Hallel. Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef says, Zeh hayom asa Hashem. In Hallel we say the words, this is the day that Hashem has made, and just again, like the day, it goes in an order, so it doesn't change, doesn't go out of order, so too the Hallel should be in order like a day. Rav Avya Amar, Rav Avya says from the following, we say in Hallel, Yehi Shem Hashem Mivorach. The name of God shall be blessed. Yehi, we sometimes have a type of drasha. Yehi means it shall be, that it shall be as it is. It shall be as it is. Yehi Shem Hashem Mivorach, that Hashem's name should be blessed and praised as it is, meaning in this order that it appears. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, V'teimer Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar Mehacha. And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, some say Rav Acha bar Yaakov says we learn it from the following, Me'ata v'yad olam. We read the same pasuk, Yishem Hashem Baruch Me'ata v'yad olam, that the name of Hashem should be blessed from now and forever. Now, from now and forever is in order, and so too the praise, the way that we bless Hashem, the way we praise Him, should be in order of the way it appears. And that's how we know that Hallel should be read in order. And the Gemara will then ask about the Shema, how we know that should be read in order, and we'll learn about that next time.